we will. That's the spirit in which I hope we will proceed today. So we will start with a couple of introductory presentations from our climate change minister here in Wales, Julie James, and from activist Scarlett Westbrook, and I will introduce them shortly. And then we will go into breakouts to have a more focused conversation on specific topic areas, specific sectors. And Natalia will be posting the links to those breakout sessions as we go in about 45-50 minutes time. And then we'll all come back again for a very brief catch up on what was discussed in each of those breakouts and to collectively reflect a little bit on what that means and where we're headed next. So I'll say a tiny bit about Black Mountains College now, just to set the scene, and then I will introduce Julie James. So for those of you just joining, I can see there's a fair few more come in the last couple of minutes while I've been speaking. Please just put in the chat where you're joining from and what you hope to be gaining from our conversation today. Before I introduce Julie James, I'd just like to say, for those of you who are not familiar with Black Mountains College yet, we are a new educational institution in mid-Wales, here in the Brecon Beacons National Park, and we were founded as a response to the climate and ecological emergency, really to interrogate what it means for how we learn and how we live. And that's because, from our perspective, climate change is not an issue. It's not something we can choose to campaign about or not. Sustainable life choices are not something which very soon are not going to be elective, which some people choose and other people don't. This is a global geological transformation, which we are actually in the middle of. This climate crisis is an era in human history. It's not an issue that that should be taught as a subject. It's a new reality which reframes how we understand the past, how we understand the present, and how we must approach the future. So that's the basis on which we're operating. And that's a new basis, I think, for an educational institution. And what that means in practice is we are pursuing 3 strands of education. We offer public education and short courses, of which this event is a part. We do NVQs, which are National Vocational Qualifications here in the UK, vocational training 1-year programs, which are free in Wales, we're pleased to say, unlike in England, which prepare people with future skills for the changes which are coming, for a low impact economy, a low carbon future. For example, regenerative horticulture, coppicing, agroecology, nature recovery, land management, and in the future, we hope renewable energy as well. And the 3rd strand we offer is a degree program, a bachelor's called Sustainable Futures, Arts, Ecology and Systems Change. And that's a unique interdisciplinary program, again, because climate change is not a question for geography or environmental science. It actually has all sorts of other dimensions, political, economic, cultural, and so on. So it's an interdisciplinary program that's designed to give you basic literacies and then to facilitate you to pursue a path in more depth, followed by a 3rd year, which is entirely structured around your own question, your own research project, and to help you actually in that 3rd year apply some of that knowledge for real world change before going off to make change in the real world. So that's what we're up to here. And we, if you'd like to know more, please look at our website. Please get in touch, come to some of our discovery days, and be involved in whatever way you would like. So what that means for today, as part of that overall mission, is this invitation to explore with us and with our facilitators who've kindly all joined from around the world for free. There's no money has changed hands in the organization of this event today. So we're very grateful to everyone for giving their time. And To begin that conversation, I'd like to invite the Minister for Climate Change from Wales, Julie James, who we're delighted has been able to join us today. The Minister has a long history of social activism, political engagement, and representing the people of Wales for the Labour Party. And she's joining us today from Cardiff, I believe. And I'm also very pleased to say that the government of which she's a part has led the way, really, in the UK and in Europe with the Future Generations Act, which, for those of you that don't know, is a fantastic piece of legislation enshrining the Sustainable Development Goals and ambitions for future generations in law. So there's a reason why we're here in Wales at Black Mountains College, and part of it is to do with that facilitating environment from the government. So in the first instance, I will hand over to Julie and invite her to say a few words. Thank you very much for joining, Julie.
Diolch yn fawr. Pnawn da, good afternoon. Mae'n bleser mawr siarad gyda chi heddiw. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today. And I really want to thank colleague Amanydd D, Black Mountain College, for hosting this and giving us this opportunity. So as you've already heard, in our Welsh Government Programme for Government, we are absolutely committed to embedding our response to the climate and nature emergency into absolutely everything that we do. And in doing so, we want to maximise the environmental, economic, social and cultural benefits to Wales. We also want to ensure that the transition to a stronger, fairer, greener Wales is carefully managed. The changes driven by the need to decarbonise our economy will have real impacts on industries, sectors of the workforce and socioeconomic groups in many different ways, depending on the pathways, policies and actions that we choose. So as has already been said, we have a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act here in Wales, and it provides the guiding principles for tackling the transition in Wales. It will allow us to both minimise the impacts, but crucially maximise the opportunities it provides for Welsh workers and communities. Achieving a just transition to net zero is essential. We must take every Welsh citizen with us and leave no one behind as we move to a greener, fairer, better future. We've just recently completed our Just Transition call for evidence, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all the responses. The call will help to build our evidence base and inform the activities we take and support engagement with other stakeholders across Wales. It's so vital that we raise awareness of the career and progression opportunities the move to a net zero economy will bring. Our new curriculum for Wales provides opportunities for schools to embed learning about climate and nature, health and well-being, humanities, science and technology, areas of learning and experience, as we call them in Wales, and they include specific climate focuses. These support our learners to achieve the four purposes of our new curriculum, one of which is that our young people become ethical, informed citizens of Wales and the world. And to ensure Wales has a skilled workforce for the future, we must motivate and engage young people on career opportunities and the world of work to access net zero opportunities. So as you've already heard a little bit about, our grant-funded environment education programmes, eco-schools and Size of Wales continue to work with children and young people. We've got over 400,000 children and young people engaged via these programmes across 93% of schools across Wales. This is really empowering our children and young people to drive change, improve their environmental awareness, take action and learn about climate change and the importance of forests and protecting our ecosystems. Wales has a strong and broad post-16 skills system that's already providing a wide range of training opportunities and delivering qualified and highly skilled individuals to the forestry sector, including higher education, further education and apprenticeships, employability and adult and community learning programmes. And just last month, our Minister for the Economy, Vaughan Gethin, published the Net Zero Skills Action Plan for Wales. The plan is a really important first step in outlining the current net zero skills position in Wales. It sets out our commitment to support our just transition to net zero through a much more coordinated approach. The plan includes 7 priority areas and 36 direct actions aimed at delivering and supporting the immediate and future skills needs of our net zero journey. Because we recognise that skills are the key enabler to deliver our ambitions for a better, fairer and green future for us all. We must ensure that the transition is fair and the most vulnerable in society are not unfairly burdened with the costs of the change. And we absolutely cannot tackle this challenge alone. The plan calls for continued strong interaction between all stakeholders, including businesses and industries, the Welsh Government plus further and higher education, to build a robust picture of what skills are likely to be required across the board. The forestry sector is absolutely key to this. The plan positions the skills landscape against our net zero commitments. We now need to gain a more detailed understanding of the skills position for each emissions sector in Wales and what skills are needed in the short, medium and long term. We'll be undertaking a big public consultation on the sector-specific skills requirements in the coming months, and the outcome will support the development of a skills roadmap for each emissions sector. So playing a key role in that journey is absolutely the forestry sector. We're taking forward a range of policy measures to support the sector, and that will open up employment opportunities associated with our new national forest, trees in general, timber, and the supply chains that support them. We know how much economic value that can add. In 2017, the ONS annual business survey showed the forestry sector contributed £665 million gross value to the Welsh economy. And between 10,300 and 11,000 employees in the forestry sector in Wales. And that's before we ramp it up. So the timber industry in Wales is an established and valued part of our rural economy. There's a really long-held ambition of mine to develop the sector, and I'm really pleased to have been able to take that forward through our programme for government and our commitment to create a timber-based industrial strategy. The sector has an absolutely crucial role to play in the environment and economic future of Wales. It allows us to build sustainability and contributes to climate change mitigation by capturing carbon within buildings for their lifetime. It also reconnects the people of Wales to nature and the biodiversity crisis that surrounds us. So, you know, it's a real win-win situation. We hope to have developed the strategy by the end of this year now, and we'll focus on how we can move towards a higher value timber product chain in Wales from Welsh wood. The products that will make the greatest contribution to helping us meet the 2050 net zero target and to growing the value of the sector in Wales. We will be looking in a lot more detail at the skills we need to support a thriving and modern timber sector in Wales, and they will be across the supply chain from tree nurseries right through to construction. So there'll be a real increase in job opportunities across the supply chain and a need for the development of skills in agriculture, processing, manufacturing and construction sectors. I hope that's one of our future foresters there that we can hear. This is a real opportunity for our processors and manufacturers in Wales to contribute to our wood economy and create new jobs, as well as building a real new innovative supply chain for high value added longer life uses. There's so much more we can do, and I'm really hoping to get a lot of that out of today's workshops. We want to support our woodland managers by giving them skills to create diverse woodlands which are resilient to the impacts of climate change and to new pests and diseases which we are sadly seeing emerge right across Wales. We need land management skills to preserve existing carbon stores and sequester carbon to mitigate the effects of rising carbon levels and carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Researchers found that all types of woodland have important roles to play in sequestration. The rates of CO2 uptake vary across different species and locations. So we need good woodland design and management to achieve that early CO2 uptake, for example, by minimizing releases of CO2 from soils and existing vegetation when trees are planted. Again, we need a very highly skilled workforce to achieve this. So we're really keen to have integrated learning and developed wood knowledge skills to equip our workforce, not just in forestry, but across engineering, design and construction sectors to contribute to our ambition of achieving net zero. We're predicting that we will need a 63% increase in forestry workers by 2030 to cope with the demand and to compensate for those retiring from the workforce. So you can see the college has got its work cut out to develop that pipeline for us. We need to showcase the opportunities associated with this modern timber sector and its supply chains to attract more and more talented individuals from across the piece. So in summing up, the drive to net zero presents exciting opportunities in a very challenging environment. All sectors need to change and quickly if we are to meet our 2050 target. So I really want to congratulate the college on the launch of the Sustainable Futures Arts, Ecology and Systems Change degree. It's a really great holistic approach, recognising the breadth of skills required for the positive and sustainable future we're all looking forward to. I'm delighted to be a small part of it. It makes a hugely important contribution and it shows Wales leading the way in developing the skills of the future. So thank you for listening to me. Diolch yn fawr iawn pawb, and I'm really looking forward to taking part in the rest of the day. Diolch.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's really helpful to have some tangible facts and figures from the Welsh Government about what they're doing, but also just to have your time. In many other countries in the world, governments are not engaging on this issue in the way that they should be doing. So our next speaker is Scarlett Westbrook, who is a journalist and climate activist who's played a key role in Teach the Future and Fridays for Future campaigns. She's been in the news lately as one of I think the lead author of the climate education bill, which is currently wending its way through Parliament in England. For those of you joining from abroad, just to be clear, England has its own set of laws, and Wales has another set of laws. It has devolved federal arrangement. So there is a separate education system in Wales as there is in England. But perhaps Scarlett might be telling us a little bit about that. But that is a significant achievement, but also a moment for climate change education in the UK, because it reframes the curriculum and some of the demands placed on schools for how they teach this. And I think it's an explicit recognition that at the moment climate change education is inadequate in schools in England. It's a little bit different in Wales, but that's perhaps something we can get into in a discussion. And we'll be Judy will still be with us, so that you can put questions to the Minister and to Scarlett after Scarlett has spoken, and then obviously we will be exploring all of these questions and others in more detail in the breakouts. So Scarlett, if I could ask you to unmute yourself, I will spotlight you. Thank you very much.
Am I good to go? Yes. Hi everyone, my name is Scarlett Westbrook and I'm an 18-year-old climate activist, as Owen has very kindly introduced me. I'm really excited to be here speaking to you all today and tell you a little bit about myself and about climate education. So I'm most known for being one of the lead organisers of the climate strikes in the UK, and also for being the youngest policy writer in Parliament. Ooh. Got some loud neighbours. So in 2018, I became the youngest person in the world to have an A-level in government politics, which I self-taught between the ages of 12 and 13 years old, specialising in climate and education policy. I did this alongside my regular Year 9 work, so I would wake up at like 4:30 AM to fit in revision and basically had no social life for a year. But it paved a good foundation for the work that I do now. And it was basically what catalysed me joining the school strike movement. So fast forwarding a few months, and I started my GCSEs and decided to choose all of the subjects that I thought would include climate change, so geography, physics, chemistry. However, I found that rather than learn about the climate crisis, it was only glanced over. And actually, because I was in the COVID GCSE year, geography was scrapped completely from my year's geography A-levels and GCSEs on our papers. But the paper that I did, which was a mock exam, that ended up being my real GCSE grade because we didn't have exams, so we were given our mock grades. We had one question on climate change, and that was to list the benefits of climate change on the UK's economy, 8 marks. And it was basically just listing all of the positives. You couldn't like take it into context. So that clearly wasn't good enough. And my friend Jo and I, in response, decided to set up a campaign to tackle it called Teach the Future, a student-led campaign to reform the education system to centre it around the climate crisis. School is meant to prepare us for the future, but that's not currently happening. We need to build a resilient, just society, and to achieve this, it's necessary for us to give students the knowledge needed to do so. That means ensuring the next generation of workers and citizens are aware of what the climate crisis is, how it's going to affect them, and the things we can do to change that. As climate change is going to affect everybody, whether they're a builder or a banker, a farmer or a pharmacist, climate education must be intertwined into every single subject in a way that's accessible for everyone, rather than just more content to memorize for exams. And I think Black Mountains does this especially well with their holistic approach to climate education and their courses in general. The impact of climate change that we can't mitigate will impact us all in some shape or form. So it's even more important that we build this resilient society in order for us to have all of the skills and knowledge necessary to deal with these impacts. However, despite the fact that climate education is essential to a green transition, our education system is failing to include it. In research that we carried out, we found that just 4% of students reported they felt like they knew a lot about climate crisis. 4%, that's 4% of the generation that have not only been leading the fight against, but also the generation that will be experiencing its impacts disproportionately. The top. At the same time, Oxfam conducted research that found over 70% of teachers, including geography and science teachers, reported they had no mention of climate change in their teacher training qualifications. So students don't know about climate change, and our teachers also don't know enough to teach us about it. So it's not looking great in terms of how prepared we are for our future there. We see the impacts of the climate crisis every day, and now more than ever. So it's essential to educate students in a way that sparks hope within them. So to try and make that happen, I wrote a bill called the Climate Education Bill and teamed up with MP Nadia Whittam to try and make it law. So because it's an amendment, or it would replace essentially the 2005 Education Act, it theoretically would apply to Wales too, because that Education Act is for England and Wales. But because we've had a bit more devolution in terms of education since then, it's not explicitly clear exactly who it would refer to. So I feel like it's probably easiest to say the climate education bill just applies to England for now until the devolution things are more like clear. But we do have a Wales branch of Teach the Future who have been doing some really good work in the Senate and have been putting some amendments through that. Also working with Welsh Labour there too. So this bill would essentially mean that climate education would be introduced into every single subject, regardless of vocation, regardless of academic stream, regardless of whether that's an apprenticeship, a BTEC, a GCSEs, or their age. And some of it has already been introduced into British law. So Nadeem Zahawi, when he was Education Secretary, took some elements of our bill and put them into law as a result of our lobbying, which were from this year beginning to phase out gas boilers, introducing climate education to primary schools for the first time, though it's not a requirement, and also introducing climate education to apprenticeships for the first time. But again, it's not like a legally binding requirement, it's a strong recommendation. So as students who have had to grow up in an education system that hasn't prepared us for a future of climate change, we want to make sure that everyone is on the path to receiving adequate training on the climate, regardless of what we may not already know. And also regardless of what we want to do in the future. It's not just scientists who are going to be impacted by the climate crisis or geographers, so everyone needs to be taught about it regardless of what they want to do when they're older. And we need to be weaving in climate education into every single subject like a golden thread, making it accessible to everybody. We need to extend climate education so that it includes knowledge about how to stop and abate the climate emergency and ecological crisis, deliver climate justice, and provide support for students to deal with eco and climate anxiety, something which climate education would also mitigate, as students will be empowered with the information needed to tackle this issue. We also need to be taught about and prepared to adapt to our changing world. The climate crisis is already here, yet our education system keeps treating it as a hypothetical future that would only affect countries far away from us. And instead, we need to ensure we're ready for what's an inevitable reality. So to achieve all of this, we must reform teacher training qualifications to prepare teachers to educate their students on the climate crisis and its interdependence with their subjects. A transformative education system could revolutionize our economy, whether that's introducing climate apprenticeships in the renewable energy sector, expanding vocational courses so that they cover sustainability, or changing academic content to give us a realistic idea of our world and subjects in their climate impacted contexts. That looks like talking about food deserts and food technology, having data from the IPCC report in maths questions where it's like, read this graph, or looking at accounts from people who are on the front line of the climate crisis in English, looking at the history of how the climate crisis even began in history, looking at solutions to the climate crisis in economics or politics or sociology, the impacts on ecosystems and biology. There's so many different examples of what this could look like. In terms of more vocational subjects, this could mean learning about insulation in apprenticeships to do with building or BTECs, mean looking at how we can reduce the use of single-use plastic in courses like hair and beauty. There's just an endless plethora of ideas here for how we can incorporate climate education. And I think that's really exciting. By doing this, we would create a precedent for the rest of the world and also create thousands of green jobs while saving the costs of tackling extreme climate breakdown further down the line. The government's plans arguably depend on it. If they're serious about getting to net zero by 2050, which is already too late, it needs the workforce to do it. For all of their talk about skills-based education, it's missing a trick by failing to train the next generation, who will be essential to the transition to a low-carbon economy. It's the workforce who will be on the front lines of adapting to the climate crisis, and that workforce will predominantly be people who are currently school-aged at this point. Young people want to be part of the solution to the climate crisis. What we need are the skills and knowledge to do so. So it's pretty simple. Teach us the truth, prepare us for the future, and introduce climate education for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Scarlett. That's inspirational, and I really appreciate the way you boiled your message down at the end to some simple takeaways. Teach the truth, prepare us for the future, and deliver climate education. I think that is very much sums up what we're trying to do here, and I think we, and I mean the institution, but also everyone here probably has a lot to learn and a lot to digest there. If you've got specific questions, please pop them in the chat for Julie and for Scarlett, and I'm just going to push straight on and deliver some of the ones that have appeared already. One of them, which maybe I'll come to you first, Scarlett, is from Ash in the UK. It says, what sectors do you see as growing and which potentially disappearing? And I think this gets to your point around, this transformational potential for climate education if we were to embrace the challenge. And you spoke about insulation, about materials innovation, but could you say a little bit more about which sectors you think, in a sense, we should mothball and which ones will be growing? And I'll be interested to see Julie's take on that too.
Well, I'd hope that all jobs in oil and gas would be redundant. Of course, with a just transition for the workers currently in those sectors, but I do hope that jobs in oil and gas don't exist in, well, as early as like next year, but certainly not when people my age are entering the workforce. I also think that when we talk about climate jobs, we usually think of jobs that require hard hats. And I think we also really need to break away from that messaging, because every job that tackles the climate in some shape or form is a green job, whether that's teachers teaching about climate change, doctors responding to public health emergencies caused by the climate crisis, and all of these different vocations. Even like now, pretty much every company is hiring or already has an in-house climate expert or sustainability person in pretty much every sector, which is something that we didn't have even maybe 3 years ago. So it's definitely a growing, climate jobs that is, and green jobs in general, definitely a growing thing across the board. In terms of what I don't think we'll see anymore is very vocational based. So I think our current building practice, for example, just aren't going to be employed as widely as they are right now, just because they don't have the retrofitting, the insulation, the techniques needed for what our climate will look like in a few years when we've emitted more carbon. I also think that more or higher carbon intensive industries will also be more threatened, and that includes things like farming, for example, which is already seeing a natural decline as people are moving to cities or wanting to pursue different jobs. But that was very rambly. The summary there is, I think there's growth here in essentially every single sector, apart from the sectors that are driving the climate crisis.
Thank you. That was not rambly at all. That was very succinct and very eloquent. Julie, can I put the same question to you in terms of from your perspective, which sectors do you think we will be seeing coming more to the fore, and which will be receding? And perhaps you have specific, there are already some moves that are happening from the government point of view.
Yeah, so very much in tune with Scarlett, actually. For us, we've got a very much higher manufacturing base in Wales and across the rest of the UK, just because of the various UK government policies over the years. So we still have a big oil and gas industry in Wales. We still have coal mines. We still have a steel industry and so on. Some of those will have to disappear altogether. Some of them will reduce very substantially, and some of them will have to completely transform the way they do business. So if you take the steel industry, for example, we must have steel. We cannot make renewable turbines without steel. We cannot make the things that generate renewable electricity without steel. And actually, there's a little bit of other mineral mining and so on in that as well. We need, therefore, to make sure that those industries are as sustainable as possible. And there are a whole series of new jobs not yet existing around carbon capture, the transition to hydrogen and other green energies. So there's lots of that kind of hard hat, as Scarlett called it, type jobs. There's science jobs, science-based jobs, lab-based jobs, doing all that sort of work. But also we face a nature emergency as well as a climate crisis. So we need to do a lot of work in regenerative farming. We've got a big new sustainable farming scheme in the process of being rolled out in Wales. I actually think that will attract more people back onto the land in order to be able to farm in a more regenerative fashion. We've got a whole forestry and nature recovery piece that I spoke about in my opening remarks, but we can go into that a lot more. But then there are a whole series of other things. So there are enormous numbers of green jobs in health and social care, for example. There are people-based jobs, basically, that we need to see through that lens. All of the things Scarlett talked about in teaching and so on, but actually just in social care, in health, in people-based things. There are the jobs of the future that I can't possibly know about. I was at a construction site yesterday in Swansea. I'm in Swansea, by the way, in my constituency at the moment. But we're building a very, very sustainable building in the centre of Swansea to showcase what offices could look like in the future. I had a long conversation with the construction workforce there, the QS. The overall site manager is female, which was a delight to behold. A woman who started off in hairdressing, as that was she was channeled towards, and then decided that she really didn't like hairdressing very much and went into construction instead. She's done a podcast if you want to look her up, by the way. Anyway, it was really struck me that as we went around that building, there were QR codes at every point, because they had a lot of people being toured around the building, and the QR points showed you a virtual reality of what the building would look like when it was complete at that point. So there were a whole series of technicians working on that building who, they're really hard to find at the moment. We need an awful lot more of them. And there were other jobs that I'd certainly never heard of that they said they really struggle to find people to do, but we need to really grow the workforce. So, for example, they had sustainable drainage systems in there. They had rainwater capture systems. There's a biophilic building going up right next door. So that's a building that contains its own food supply and power supply. Like a little spaceship. So there are lots of jobs that, you will know more about than I do, but we need to have a flexible skill system that allows those jobs to come through. And I think Scarlett would really agree with this. We need to be able to teach people young enough down the education system to understand what to aim for. Because people can only really aim for what they understand and can see. So we still have large numbers of boys and girls in Wales wanting to do very traditional things because they have no experience of anything else. So getting people out into the world and getting the information to them through our career structures is really important as well. And then actually just having the courses on offer that you guys are about to start offering, because actually where would you find the way to skill up for some of these jobs? So yeah, I mean, I have got loads and loads of stats I can quote at you, but actually one of the biggest problems we have in Wales is we have an aging population. We really need to attract young people in and get replacement jobs into the system as well. So the green jobs that exist in forestry, for example, that workforce is really quite old. They're going to retire in the next 10 years. So we need people like Scarlett coming through to replace them, never mind the growth.
Thank you very much, Julie. There's a couple more questions coming in the chat, which I will get to now, but if you've got questions, please put them there as well. There's one question that I'd like to disaggregate a bit, and it gets to the point that I think you both made, which is that every job will be a climate job in some respect, because it will be impacted by the unfolding reality. And that very much, getting back to what I said at the beginning, that very much is the underpinning for today, for the purpose of BMC and for the purpose of this conversation, is how will those changes manifest? So if every job is a climate job, then the question we had was, the sustainability sector as a whole is not very diverse, and how do we go about addressing that and improving diversity? And I think that is specifically probably a European and a North American question largely, and I know that this is a very global audience. So there's a diversification question there for global minority countries or white majority countries, but also around, actually, is there such a thing as a sustainability sector anymore? Because this is something that affects absolutely every company. And likewise, as Scarlett pointed out, lots of companies now are hiring climate officers and sustainability officers, but these are soft skills, not just hard hat skills. So this question of diversity, and then, whether or not there is such a thing as a sustainability sector anymore. Scarlett, would you like to comment first?
I think this is a really good question and an important one. So globally, I wouldn't say that there's a diversity problem, because in countries that are the most impacted by the climate crisis, it is Indigenous people on the ground who are leading the front line action and solution to the climate crisis, or natural disasters that are occurring there. However, with that said, they're often not the same people who are in government. So there's still a problem with diversity of income or class there, and there's still a big wealth disparity on a global scale too. But in the UK as well, I've been doing climate policy work since I was 14, so since 2019-ish, which isn't that long ago, but I've seen a lot of change since then. When I started, I really don't even think I can think of a single person now who wasn't from a middle class white background. I also didn't know many women who were in the sector. It was pretty much all middle-aged men. And I have seen that change. So now I can think of so many people who are from all different backgrounds, all different regions and everything. But it is still very much a problem. I think there's a mix of reasons because that are responsible for that. So I think the first one is that because climate jobs have been in this sustainability sector for so long, they're very much seen as a geography sort of job, if that makes sense. And I feel like geography has historically had some connotations with being a bit more middle class, because I guess it's because it's a bit more vague as a subject. There's not a clear career path, so you can do whatever you want to, which I know can sometimes be off-putting to people, which is perhaps why it's people who are from more financially well-off backgrounds who are pursuing these jobs, because they could afford they could afford to not perhaps get a job straight away, or to shop around and do different jobs. I think another reason is because often these jobs are paid very badly, regardless of what your training is. The starting salary in the sustainability sector is really bad, and that means it's then not feasible for people who are on low income as it is to work for them, especially if they've gotten various levels of higher education. There's also very much an institutional racism problem here. The climate crisis is born from systemic discrimination. I'm from the West Midlands, which is where the Industrial Revolution was started, even though I've lost my Brummy accent now. It comes out when I'm angry though. And we don't recognise that enough, the fact that we contribute disproportionately to the climate crisis. We disproportionately, not just the West Midlands, the rest of the country too, but this is a crisis that we have disproportionately driven, yet we're not going to be experiencing the impacts nearly as hard as the countries who have contributed the least. And as that dynamic plays out in the wider context, I think it also plays out in the sector. In this country in particular, I think that sustainability has very historically had more of a nature focus rather than a like justice focus or even a climate focus. It's always been about plants and birds and animals, and not about how humans and those nature aspects are interdependent and all connected, which again, because it was so nature-based, I also think that is one of the reasons why a lot of the like bigger figures in sustainability are from wealthier backgrounds, because people who live in or who are working class living in cities wouldn't have had the same access and then the same desire to pursue the same career. Like the TLDR of that is, I think that we have quite bad diversity as a sector. Not that I think the sector is going to exist in perhaps like even 5 years, because it's branching out so much. It is improving, but I don't think it's improving fast enough. I think some of the reasons for that are because people don't have access to climate related education, to nature, to where like these jobs are even discussed. I wasn't ever taught in school that you could be like a climate policy person. I just did it and it just kind of happened. But I was never taught about these sorts of jobs, about like think tanks and policy and research. I thought climate jobs were just science. So lots of people aren't even being taught that this is a possibility, which again is not great. And to improve this, I think we need to, as a sector, try and shift from seeing things as purely ecological and instead understanding and seeing them in their full context, which is their interdependence with everybody in society, and also see how marginalizing factors exacerbate that. And I also think we need a lot more climate education so that this information and the fact that these jobs even exist is out there more, and more funding so that it's better for people, or more funding so that more people can access these jobs even, and the training needed to pursue them.
Terrific. Thank you very much indeed. I just, before I sort of reframe that question to Julie, I just like to add my own 2 cents, which is to agree wholeheartedly with this framing of environmental concerns over the last couple of decades as being one with nature, rather than actually around justice and historical relations. And there's a question in the chat about the socio-ecological underpinnings of modernity and where the plantations and the coal plants and in fact the exploitation of Wales as natural resources, as well as lots of other colonies around the world, were the beginnings and the underpinnings of our current problem. And if we see it in that sort of total picture, then of course the solutions and the conversations are also very different. This is not a narrow sustainability sector conversation about nature. This is actually about politics. This is about class. This is about social movements. So I think just to agree with you very much, and I wrote a book called The Tree Line, which was essentially a rebuke to British nature writing, which builds on that point. But to Julie, would you like to say something about the diversity element, but also actually the roots of the crisis in racism, violence, and extractivism more broadly?
Yes, certainly. Sometimes I forget I'm a politician and so used to getting being the minister. But so just to digress slightly for a moment. So I've been a climate activist all my life, and I'm 65 now. So it's not, it's not a new thing. It's just become a lot more obvious. And so I hope, Scarlett, that for you in your lifetime, it will become even more obvious. So I became a climate activist alongside my family in northern Canada in the early 1960s, when the effects of what was then called acid rain were very visible across the temperate rainforests of North Canada. And at the same time, it was really obvious what was happening to the Cree Nation, who were the indigenous people of that region. They were being driven off their land effectively. And a lot of the beginnings of monocultural tree planting, the destruction of the natural forest and so on was beginning to happen. And my parents were appalled by it, and my entire family kind of morphed into being a pretty radical activists for the rest of their lives. And my father was a miner, so he was in the wrong kind of industry to have that kind of feeling, but he was a very active trade unionist and quite a radical man all his life. And my mother was a nurse and just as radical in her own way. And so they've brought me up as part of that, what was then quite kind of wacky movement, actually, but it's become more and more mainstream. We're also lifelong vegetarians, and when I was growing up, if you were a vegetarian, people would tell me that I would, well, just not be healthy, wasn't possible, it was a mad thing to do, etc. And now it's extremely commonplace, and most people having the same reaction to vegans as they were to vegetarians when I was growing up. So I suppose for me, there is a little bit of a message of hope in there that the world does change. People do start to become more aware, but we do have to speed it up. So here in Wales, we have to do more about the climate crisis and net zero in the next 10 years. We have to do double what we did in the last 30. So we have to go a lot faster. We have to get the movement out a lot more. But, you know, there's no getting away from the fact that this is embedded in an unequal capitalist system that exploits natural resources for the profit of a very few people. And those very few people do tend to be white and male. So, you know, that's absolutely ingrained into our economies at the moment. And what we mean when we talk about a just transition is a flattening out of that, a removal of those kinds of profits and a redistribution of them to the people. So if you look at the Industrial Revolution, and I'm always fascinated by the number of places in Britain, Scarlett, that claim to be the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, because I think you'll find that Wales claims that as well. But if you look at the Industrial Revolution in Wales, the legacy for most of the people of Wales is bad health embedded in their genes, poor economic outlook, and bad housing. The wealth of Wales was stripped away from Wales and exported and exploited by banks and financiers and wealthy capitalist individuals. We need to make sure that that does not happen again as we move to renewables. So we've just made a state renewable energy company here in Wales. We're rolling out enormous numbers of community energy projects with a view to democratizing it effectively, making sure that it goes back into the hands of the people who need it and who generate it. And I'll just leave you with one last story on that one. I went on a civic tour in Swansea here of all the kind of grand buildings that were made by a family called the Glenvivians, who used to own the coal and steel and iron and copper works here in Swansea. And the lovely guy who was showing us around this particular place said that the Glenvivians had built the building. And my mother piped up from the back, "No, they didn't." And he said, "I assure you, madam, they did." And she said, "No, they didn't. My grandfather built it." Because he actually built it. You know, put the bricks one on top of the other. And I think that encapsulates beautifully who gets the credit for the effort put in by everyone. So what we need to do in this climate revolution is also, I'm afraid, revolutionize the economics of it. And we need to do that alongside some of the global finance. So I had a conversation only this week with Lloyds Bank, who have a sustainability person. Scarlett's quite right, they exist all over the place. But actually, who has been helping Wales be part of an international group of what are called subnational states, cities and provinces, so non-UN states effectively, so alongside Quebec and California and most of the land of Germany and so on. To develop a global finance system to put money into the sustainability of our economy and of our industries and of our natural world, because without that we won't be able to do it. So even to get to the 30 by 30 goals in Wales, I haven't got enough money to do that as a government. I need to be able to lever in finance. So we need to be able to influence that finance, to democratize it at the same time. Otherwise, we will just end up in the same spiral of misery as we had before, with the same people bearing the burden. So that talk about just transition, that's not just talk. That's pretty radical, revolutionary stuff in terms of the economies of what we're trying to do. And I'll shut up then, Ben, because I can go on about that for a long time.
Thank you very much. That's really it's terrific to get that perspective from Canada and from mining, and you know, the analysis of what a just transition might mean and look like in practice. It's a huge task, and one that is not the job of governments alone, of course. So we're out of time for questions. We're to Scarlett and Julie at the moment, but we are going to now dive into some more detailed conversations on different topics. And for that, we're joined by a whole host of participants. I don't think I can read out everybody's name, but terrific experts from around the world who are joining us for conversations on a range of different topics. And I will hand over to Natalia in a minute, who will direct you to those breakout groups. So there are topics on education. There's a conversation on politics. If you'd like to join Julie for more of in that line, law and justice, housing and construction, water, journalism and writing, the arts, healthcare, and food and farming. So those breakout groups will start at 1 o'clock, which is in about 3 minutes. So if you do want to very quickly stretch your legs, you may. And the breakout groups, the list of all the speakers is in the chat. Natalia has very helpfully put it there. And there is a separate link for those different breakout groups, I think. Is that right, Natalia? Do you want to speak up and correct me?
Yes, I can. I can talk everyone through the details of the shift into the breakouts. So I've put the link to a list of all the speakers in the chat. And just to say that there's 2 people that haven't been able to join us today. Andrew Ogun, who was going to be in the future of arts, he's traveling, and Angela Mead, who was going to be in farming and food, is in hospital. I think she's okay, but she's unable to join. Otherwise, I think everybody is there, and they're all in this chat, and they will all move into the breakouts with you. So I'm going to open the breakouts room, which means that they will pop up on your screen as a list, and you can then say join, and that will take you into that breakout straight away. Once you're in the breakout, you can again swap breakout rooms as well. So feel free to do that if you want to hear 2 different topics. The breakouts are really there to allow a bit more detailed conversations. They're going to be very informal. You can ask questions, you can raise things that you might want to discuss. I think most of the speakers have also prepared a short presentation. So, you know, whoever is there, that's the conversation. You're exploring a theme together. And then there is also a blue button that says leave room, I think, and that will take you straight back into this plenary. So you either can move breakouts by clicking the 4 dots at the bottom of your screen that say breakout rooms in a minute, and move to another breakout, or you can come back into the main meeting by pushing the big blue button. I think either me or Ben are going to stay in this meeting. So if you get lost, then please come and find us here and we will help you. The breakouts will be about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, after which you will be moved back into here, and then we will do just a final few concluding thoughts on this session. Anything else, Ben?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, I'm gonna hit, and they should all come up on your screen now. So if they're not coming up, then there should be a little button now. Yeah, 4 dots at the bottom saying breakouts. Click that, and then you've got a list of the different breakout rooms. I hope you can all find it. And the breakouts will start in a couple of minutes once everybody has chosen a room.
Back. Welcome back, everybody. One minute, there we are. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope we didn't have to curtail the conversations too much, and that if you do want to keep speaking, that you've made connections which you can continue. We've got about just over 10 minutes just to tie things together, and I'd like to do two things, to ask you to do two things. The first is if you could just put in the chat a one-liner about your conversation, what you learned, what was the most salient takeaway, what you'd like to highlight to other people, perhaps who weren't able to join today. You can also speak that if you like, just unmute yourself and contribute, or put up a hand and I will notice and call on you. And the second is to put in any questions that you would like to us all to consider, or which you think are arising. And some people popped out of their breakout rooms and put a couple of questions to me already, which I would like to kick things off. And then I'll close with a few notices and signposts for other things and other places other fora where this conversation can continue. There's some courses from BMC, and there's some other conferences that Manish and others are involved with. But firstly, just put your one-liners into the chat, and also any questions. And the first one, which was from Tom as a result of his conversation, which was, this is great, and Black Mountains College and many others are part of an emerging movement, but it still feels quite niche in the broader context, both globally and within the UK. How can we, as a social movement, perhaps kind of break out of the echo chamber and take this conversation further? And what actions can we take to kind of heighten awareness and to further the movement in other ways? So that was a question that he asked. And if you've got anything you'd like to add to that, please put your hand up. And I might call on Tom to see if he's had any further reflections. Would anybody like to speak to that? Tom, would you like to add something?
Well, you put it far better than I did. But yeah, I've thought about it a lot, and how we address that, because I really don't come from I think the normal mold. So I was like, how would I think about doing it? And to be honest, probably not the most obvious way, but it's obviously the obvious one is education. I think you've got to make sure that our children are asking the uncomfortable questions to their parents, regardless of where they come from or what they've done. So then the stimulating debate at home, I think, is the fastest way to get people involved. And then the other side of this is to then, what do they do? How do they belong to something? And I'm yet to find the right movement that will allow us to belong, but still continue to, people, we need to get everyone involved in this debate, not just the people who are going to stop flying and stop doing everything and live in a hole. And that's me being flippant there. So we still need to allow people to go on their holidays or not feel judged, but we want them to belong to the community of, I'm an environmentalist, or I believe in looking after the world or the earth. And as soon as they start belonging to this, my wife's a psychologist, as soon as you start belonging to a movement, you then start doing more and more of it. So the analogy she gives me is, if you're a runner and you run 1 kilometer a day, you're a runner. You belong to becoming a runner, that's great. But actually, if you associate yourself as a runner, you then will do 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 10 kilometers, then you become a marathon runner. And that's, you've got to allow that it's okay to belong to that group, even if you're only running 1 kilometer a day. And that was my thoughts, my reflections on it. So how do we get people to be involved in that?
Thank you very much. I can see a hand from Andrea, and I'm going to ask her to speak. And I'd just like to mention, I read a psychology paper this morning, which was talking about collectivizing despair and collectivizing hope. And as soon as you collectivize both of those things, actually transformation becomes an awful lot more possible. So I think one of the things we can do, which is very simple, which is keep talking and keep joining and keep having more of these kinds of conversations. But Andrea, please unmute yourself if you could.
Hey, I want to share about my group. We were talking about houses and architects. There were two architects, one from the UK, Philip, and other two from Ecuador. And this idea of using local material or taking like back ancestral traditions or listening to what was around before to build houses that are sustainable, that are affordable, even made by mud, that it's something that's a bit crazy here. We call them like poor people houses, but like doing another design or changing, like learning from what we have now and doing something that it's like available, affordable. It's just changed the way that we see, not looking at outside, other, like looking at the communities, the local, the territories to see what is there, like to open up a bit our eyes to see what we have around us, what has been made. It's really, really interesting. Also, this idea that Philip shared, that he's a mountaineer and like inspired by also these spaces in nature where you just go deep and then come back to the city and try and find ways to do something that it's more sustainable. That's like, if we, I feel like always that if we are more in touch with nature, then we are inspired by what we have around. I wanted to share that.
Thank you very much. There's another hand from Modio Raman. If you could unmute yourself and speak.
Hi. Sorry, my battery's about to run out, so I keep putting my camera off, so I hope it stays. So I just wanted to bring back to what you were saying, Ben, around this question about how, it's very niche. The question was, how it's very niche. How do we spread the movement? And as an example, living in Dartmoor, that there's this thing about wild camping, and somebody had said we need to bring bushcraft back to children. We need to bring bushcraft. And I thought it's brilliant, but why is bushcraft happening only in the small places in Devon and so on? Why isn't it happening in the cities? And then you go back to 80% of the land in England is inaccessible, and people can't access the land in their space. And it used to, that's what was happening. This is what we're finding, that this access isn't there. And sometimes people look at me blankly and go, they're like, well, cities, they can come here or somewhere else, and it becomes a kind of a mystification. It becomes a kind of, people want to exoticize it and make it to something really exotic when it's really something very simple. Children go to a field and might find another one whittling a piece of wood and go, oh, that's pretty cool, let me do that. And so, yeah, that's just, and I just wanted to say, I put this comment in the chats, just maybe because it was about, because I woke up with this kind of sense of like, what if every place had a field where we could all children could just gather, what would happen? So I sent this in the chat. I have a dream where every child, and it's just based upon the idea of, I have a dream by Martin Luther King. So just trying to use that idea. So I have a dream where every child of this isle can say, I know my place. And in this dream, every child, whether black or brown or white, can say, in my place, in my corner of this big old world, there is a field just here where I live, where I can gather with others to make fire. And through that fire, whether we are white or brown or black, Christian, Jew or Muslim or Hindu, we can speak our stories. We give our bushcraft to each other, and we laugh and we play, and we know our place.
Thank you very much. That's a very beautiful and poetic way. In fact, I'm going to draw a line to end, because that's I don't think we can top that. That's a very moving end to the afternoon. So taking that lovely thought of knowing our place and thinking about how we widen the movement and translating it into some tangible, concrete steps, I'd like to just signpost some of the things that some of the participants here today are involved with. The first is Scarlett Westbrook's bill that is currently on its second reading in Parliament. If you are in England or the UK and you have an MP, write to your MP and get them to support that bill, because it's an important piece of legislation and it's a very critical first step. Another is that Elspeth Jones leads an organisation called ClientEarth, which was discussed in the Future of Law panel, and they have some fantastic campaigns, particularly around fiduciary duties of companies, which we can support and should support. The Right to Roam campaign about the access to land that Modio mentioned is a really important one. The ecocide law, Stop Ecocide, is again a no-brainer for those of us involved in regenerative culture and politics. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is another movement which is gaining real teeth and traction, which is worth supporting. And then there are a couple of places we can go to continue this conversation. One is the Ecoversities Conference in April, which Manish Jain, who joined us for the Future of Education panel, is keenly involved with. That is a fantastic gathering of like-minded institutions around the world, and it's growing every year. And there are a series of teach-ins through the Open Society University Network all around climate change this spring. BMC is going to be participating, but there are lots of others, and we'll be sharing more about that on our website. And of course, you can engage in more depth with Black Mountains College ourselves. You can sign up to our newsletter, have a look at our Ecological Futures camp for young people this summer. Come and stay with us in the Welsh Mountains, work with our partner Welsh Water and others. We've got a new story, which is another residential about centering climate breakdown and what that means for ourselves, our communities, and our jobs. And of course, we've got our vocational courses recruiting this September and our degree program, which will be starting this September. So do take a look at those. And there's a short course called Preparing for Sustainable Futures, which is designed to help you prepare for that degree program, but also as a standalone course to come and address some of these questions in more detail. Because make no mistake, climate disruption is here. And as you all know, I think partly why you're here, we're at partway through that story, and things are going to speed up over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to mean an awful lot of change, which a lot of people aren't ready for. So I think one aspect of the echo chamber, or in fact that we can be kind of niche people at the moment, drawing on Julie's story from earlier, there are those who've been speaking about these issues since the 1950s, 60s and 70s, and we are growing. And that social movement already, we have this many people together having this conversation today, and we will be growing more. And these are questions and realities that the rest of the world will be catching up with very soon. So I think we can all take comfort from the fact that that we're open and we're clear-eyed about this conversation, and we have found our tribe, as it were. We have belonging. We have at least a place to talk about this here and elsewhere. So keep having those conversations. Recordings will be available of the session today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks to our panelists. A very big thank you, especially to Natalia, who has drawn this whole event together today. And thank you lastly to all of you for taking the time. Diolch yn fawr iawn. See you soon.